My name is Myra Pullman. I was 33 years old on the night that changed my life forever. The night my father handed me a letter designed to break me in front of 300 people. It happened at my sister Leah's wedding, held at a beautiful house beside a lake. The trees were strung with tiny fairy lights that glowed like scattered stars and threw their golden reflections across the water. A band played soft, dreamy music. Leah stood nearby in an expensive lace dress, holding a glass of champagne, watching me the way a cat watches a mouse that is already cornered. My father crossed the room toward my table, holding a cream-colored envelope sealed with red wax stamped with his own initials. He handed it to me in front of 6 other guests and told me I could read it whenever I felt ready. I did not wait. I opened it right there. It was 2 pages, typed in cold legal language, but beneath all that formal phrasing were genuinely cruel things said about me by a man who was supposed to love me. The final line informed me that I was no longer a part of the Pullman family in any way that mattered. When I looked up, Leah was smiling. She was waiting for me to cry, to knock my chair over, to give 300 wedding guests something dramatic to whisper about on their way home. What she did not know, what none of them knew, was that 3 weeks before that night, I had already signed papers of my own, papers that were going to change everything they believed they owned. To understand why that moment mattered so much, you have to understand where it all began. My mother's name was Carol Pullman. She was a brave and brilliant woman who died from a terrible illness when I was 14 years old. The short version of that story is devastating enough. The long version is worse. She spent 9 months growing smaller and weaker in a hospital bed while my father filled his time with office renovations and client dinners. She would ask me to bring her drawing pads because creating things was how she breathed. She asked my father to bring her work files because she still cared deeply about the business she had built. He brought flowers instead. Eventually, she stopped asking him for anything at all. My mother was the one who had actually started our family's construction company back in 1998, working from an old table she found at a garage sale. She designed the first 3 major buildings that made the company famous. She was the builder, the visionary, the one with the talent. My father was a salesman, charming, persuasive, good at making people believe in things. Together, they had been a strong team, but the company was her creation, and she owned nearly half of it. 2 weeks after her funeral, I found my father emptying her closet, stuffing her suits, her jewelry, and her shoes into black trash bags as though her life were just clutter to be cleared away. He was so thorough that he missed only one thing, a small cedar box hidden on the top shelf behind old building plans. When I opened it, it smelled exactly like her, like sweet wood and the dried lavender she kept in her drawers. Inside was a handwritten letter. It said, "Myra, everything I built so you would never have to ask anyone for help. Remember that when people try to tell you what you deserve." I was 14. I thought it was just something mother said to sound wise. I kept the box for 19 years without ever thinking to turn the letter over. That was my greatest mistake and my mother's greatest secret. About a year after her death, my father began bringing home a woman named Diane Morris. She had kept the company's books for years and had even attended my mother's funeral, sitting in the second row in a black dress, the only person there who did not cry. By the following spring, Diane had moved into our house. By summer, she had quietly begun erasing my mother from every surface. She moved my mother's reading chair into the garage. She took her photographs off the walls. She turned my parents' bedroom into a yoga room. One Tuesday morning, I found my parents' wedding photo wedged between a cereal box and old mail in the trash. I cleaned it off and hid it in my room. Diane noticed. She came in my room that night, sat on my bed, and tried to act kind. She said my mother would have wanted my father to be happy and told me not to be selfish. I was 15 years old and didn't yet have the words to explain that her kindness felt like a performance, like someone singing a song they secretly despise. Diane's erasure was methodical. She had my mother's name removed from the office wall. She gave away my mother's drafting table. She boxed up her awards and called it Moving Toward the Future. When I was 16, my half-sister Leah was born, and my father announced to everyone that this was his new beginning, as though his life with my mother and me had simply been a rough draft. Leah grew up with dance lessons, private schools, and a white car waiting in the driveway on her 16th birthday. My father uses connections to open career doors for her before she even had to knock. Meanwhile, waitress after school, borrowed textbooks, and ate cheap noodles alone in my room, while the three of them had dinner downstairs. Diane always sat exactly 3 places at the table. She told people I preferred to be alone. Leah wasn't cruel by nature. She was just a child who had only ever heard Diane's version of events. When she was 12, she found me alone in the kitchen washing dishes during Thanksgiving and asked why I was never in the family photos. I told her I was usually the one taking the pictures. She believed me, and I let her, because the truth was too heavy for both of us to carry right then. I left home the morning I turned 18. I had 1 suitcase, a scholarship letter, and my mother's cedar box. My father told me that if I walked out, I should never expect anything from him. I walked out anyway. It took me 15 years to build a life worth living. I studied structural engineering because I needed to understand how much weight something could bear before it finally broke. I worked without asking anyone for help. My closest friend was a woman named Grace, a lawyer who specialized in estates and wills. She was the only person who knew my whole story. She said I was the strongest person she had ever met, but also the loneliest. She was right on both counts. Everything shifted on a Tuesday in October, when I was 32. I had finally saved enough to buy my first home, but the bank told me they couldn't approve my loan. I had $180,000 in debt attached to my name, loans taken out when I was 16 and 17, tied to my father's company buildings, using my Social Security number. Someone in my own family had stolen my identity. I sat in my car and cried for a long time, then called Grace. She began pulling records and discovered something that rewrote my entire understanding of my past. My mother had established a legal trust for me before she became ill. She had left me 40% of the company. It was supposed to transfer me on my 30th birthday. My father had known for years and had said nothing. He had buried it the same way he buried everything else that belonged to her. When the invitation to Leah's $280,000 wedding arrived, I understood immediately where the money was coming from. Grace filed the necessary court papers to reclaim my trust and reported the identity theft to the federal authorities. We kept it quiet for now. I went dress shopping with Leah and Diane to keep up appearances and watched Diane pay for a $14,000 dress using a credit card in my name. I photographed the receipt and sent it to Grace. The night before the wedding, I sat alone with my mother's letter one final time. On impulse, I turned it over. On the back, in her handwriting, was the name of a lawyer and a single instruction: ask for the trust. She had known. She had always known that my father might try to take what was mine, and she had left me a way out, hidden in the one place she trusted me to find. The wedding ceremony itself was genuinely lovely. I sat in the back row because Diane had arranged it that way. I watched Leah marry a man named Nathan, who seemed like someone who truly loved her. During the reception, my father approached my table with that cream envelope, handed it to me, and waited. I read every word. Then I looked up, smiled, and thanked him. I went and danced with Nathan's uncle. I stayed for the rest of the evening and genuinely enjoyed myself. My father and Diane spent the night watching me from across the room, confused and unsettled, unable to understand why I wasn't falling apart. I spoke briefly with Nathan before leaving. He quietly admitted that he had noticed troubling things about how the company's finances were being managed. I told him only to be good to Leah. He nodded like a man who already intended to be. On Monday morning, 2 letters arrived at my father's office. One was from the federal government, notifying him of a formal investigation into identity theft. The other was from Grace, informing him that I was reclaiming my 40% of the company. He called me immediately. He said I was destroying the family. Diane called too, crying at first, then turning sharp and mean when she realized tears weren't working. I did not argue with either of them. There was nothing left to argue about. Leah called a few days later, her voice quiet and confused. She asked me if it was all true. I told her that it was all of it, and I told her as gently as I could, we aren't close. Not in the way sisters might have been under different circumstances, but we speak once a month now. That feels like a beginning of something, or at least a ceasefire. My father was required to return my share of the company, repair my credit, and restore my mother's name to the company website and the office wall. He stepped down from his position as head of the firm. I have my own office now. I design and build things, just as she did. I keep her cedar box on my desk where I can see it every morning. He spent decades trying to erase two women, my mother and me. He almost succeeded with her. He did not succeed with me. I know exactly who I am. I am Carol Pullman's daughter. I am the one who learned to calculate how much weight a thing can bear before it gives way. And I am still standing.